A China Story, The Beginning. Towering over the east of the world for 5,000 years has been a unique and time-honored ancient civilization with a continuous history and culture. China. The industrious and brave Chinese people have made contributions such as the compass, paper-making, gunpowder, and printing to the development and progress of human civilization. In those 5 millennia, the Chinese have recorded at least 4 periods of prosperity. The first in the Zhou Dynasty, in which the Chinese feudal system of administration was introduced. The second was in the Han Dynasty, when emperors governed with non-interference, farming, peaceful development, and dispatched envoys to forge the first contacts with the West, opening up the Silk Road for trade. The third was in the Tang Dynasty, when China's GDP was about 1/3 of the world's, and students came from Japan and neighboring countries to study in China. The fourth rise of China occurred in the Ming Dynasty, when Admiral Zheng He and his powerful fleets were sent to sail from the South China Sea to the Indian Ocean, to Africa, and, arguably, even to America, some 71 years before Columbus. The Chinese people are a peace-loving people. Whereas Julius Caesar said, "I came, I saw, I conquered," the Chinese said, "I came, I saw, I made friends, and I went home." Not one battle was fought, not one colony seized, and nobody was enslaved. On the contrary, when the West came to China in the 18th century to open it up for trade at gunpoint, the peace-loving Chinese suffered almost ceaseless humiliation from foreign invaders for 2 centuries. In the 14th century, the Renaissance delivered Europe from the darkness of the Middle Ages, freed minds, stimulated innovation and creativity in literature, art, science, and technology, and hastened the birth of individualism, capitalism, and colonialism. At the end of the 15th century, European voyagers set out across the oceans to discover and conquer what lay beyond, while colonizing whatever they discovered. In the later period of the 18th century, Britain's Industrial Revolution, America's War of Independence, and the French Revolution dramatically changed the progress of human civilization. Modernization of human society became an unstoppable historical trend, but the Chinese, still complacent at the time with national peace and splendor, were completely unaware of the misfortune about to befall them. Western countries, aiming to enrich themselves with natural resources through their military supremacy, forcibly expanded colonialism to the east. A turbulent situation unimagined ever before, and the most painful period in its history was about to be forced upon this nation of peace lovers. For a long time, China's foreign trade had focused on exporting tea and agricultural products, fine silks, and porcelain, which the West purchased with silver dollars. Following the Industrial Revolution and the booming productivity it brought, Britain's most urgent desire was to enlarge its global markets, and, in particular, find a way of getting back the huge amounts it had paid China in silver dollars. British colonists flooded China with opium, and so were able to plunder over 1.5 million kilograms of silver dollars in the following 4 decades. In response, and painfully aware of the hazards of opium, the Chinese government decided to prohibit opium smoking, forced the Western merchants to surrender their stocks of the drug, and destroyed it. In 1840, the opium merchants, nearly all British, together with the British men of war, invaded China and launched the First Opium War. China then, as the main power in the East, enjoyed about 1/3 of global GDP, and had military forces of 800,000. The British had just 7,000 men in their expeditionary force, and fewer than 20,000 at the end of the war. Yet China lost the war. Hardly had the Qing government negotiated grossly unequal treaties with Britain and the other invaders when the Second Opium War broke out in 1860. By then, China's GDP was 1.6 times that of Britain. Yet China lost again. Accordingly, the Chinese emperor in 1860 ordered that the advanced technologies of the West must be learned. The first westernization movement saw the initiation of new industries to improve military hardware. New naval and land forces were established. more schools were built, and the students were sent overseas for higher education. The disastrous Sino-Japanese War broke out in 1894, when China's GDP was 5 times that of Japan. China's newly equipped forces lost once again. The Westernization movement was deficient because China's GDP represented prosperity, but not proportionate national strength. In 1895, a batch of scholars attempted to organize a coup to install a constitutional monarchy. But this 100 days reform was terminated forcefully 103 days later by the court. A battle cry became louder in China in the beginning of the 20th century: revolution, with Dr. Sun Yat-sen in the forefront. The revolution broke out in 1911 and took down the Qing dynasty, ending 2,000 years of feudal monarchies, replacing it with the first Chinese republic. The emperor was gone and the pigtail braid was cut. There was the Congress, the Provisional Constitution, and many political parties, but in reality, political power was controlled by Yuan Shikai and the northern warlords. China, right after the revolution that overthrew the imperial dynasty, and barely organized enough to stand on its feet, joined the First World War in 1917 and declared war on Germany. It was thousands of miles away from the European theatre, but the Allies wanted China, perhaps to stop Germany from siphoning off its resources and assets in the Qingdao colony in Shandong to help finance its war in Europe. Germany was defeated, and in the Paris Peace Conference in 1918, China participated as equals for the first time, but only to be humiliated by the Allies when the former German colony of Qingdao in China was returned not to China but to Japan. That resulted in the May 4th movement in 1919. It started as a student movement, and then developed into a youth movement, and ultimately a movement among the Chinese intelligentsia in a quest for an ideological basis for China's future development. At around that time, the October Revolution succeeded in Russia. The world's first socialist country emerged. Intellectuals in China opted Marxism over other political models. The first National Congress of the Communist Party of China, CPC, was held in July 1921. With the death of Sun Yat-sen and an attempt by the Kuomintang to purge CPC elements, the two parties' collaboration was ruptured in 1927. In the same year, the CPC launched its land revolution and armed uprising. Japan invaded China in 1937, leading to the setting up of the anti-Japanese Kuomintang Chinese Communist Party United Front. Chinese people, then united, defeated Japan, the invader. After the wars, the peace which the Chinese people had craved for so long did not arrive. The Kuomintang Chinese Communist Party civil war broke out in June 1946. It was a hard and bitter struggle, but with the Chinese People's Liberation Army occupation of Nanjing in April 1949, the Kuomintang's administration in mainland China came to an end. The People's Republic of China was established on October 1, 1949, and led by Chairman Mao Zedong, immediately set about its strength and prosperity, and spread the wealth among the common people. It took only half a year for the new nation to stabilize the price of commodities and tackle other serious national issues that had plagued China since ancient times. Land reform was carried out continuously in rural areas so that more than 300 million peasants obtained about 700 million acres of land. There was great optimism to build a better new China despite many obstacles. The Korean War broke out in 1950 and China joined the war. Relations between China and Western countries collapsed. China was isolated and sanctioned by them and faced a painstakingly long period of total self-reliance. In 1957, China had just finished its first 5-year plan when some of its leaders decided to launch the Great Leap Forward, in the misguided belief that it was a shortcut to strengthening the country. This was followed by the tragic Great Chinese Famine, which almost crippled the country. The national economy recovered gradually between 1962 and 1965. However, the country was weakened and power was excessively concentrated in a few individuals. The Cultural Revolution was initiated officially on May 16, 1966, which created considerable turmoil and was exploited by counter-revolutionary groups. This resulted in the most destructive upheavals to the country and injustice to countless people. The national economy was seriously disrupted. Social, cultural, and legal institutions were trampled, and the gap in modernization with advanced countries was further widened. However, in the 1960s and 1970s, friendships with other countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America were continuously expanded, winning China more room for international development. 4 months before US President Richard Nixon's visit to China in 1972, China regained its seat in the United Nations. The Gang of Four responsible for the Cultural Revolution was smashed in October 1976. In 1978, Deng Xiaoping delivered a speech saying, "A party, a country, a nation. If it only abides by the books, then thinking rigidifies, superstition prevails, progress stops, vitality wanes, and the death of the party and nation would be in sight. If reform doesn't proceed now, modernization and socialism would collapse." The speech was described as emancipating the mind, seeking truth from facts, uniting as one, and looking forward. The reform and opening up of China officially began. While meeting with the Prime Minister of Japan, Deng Xiaoping further specified the 4 modernizations proposed by Premier Zhou Enlai in the 1960s, namely, to develop China in the 20th century as a socialist power with modern agriculture, industry, national defense, and science and technology. He also indicated that the aim was for China to reach about $1,000 per capita by the end of the 20th century. Following the creation of 4 special economic zones, 14 coastal port cities were opened in succession, and a more prosperous lifestyle was enjoyed by many ordinary families. Greater creativity and innovation, along with respect for knowledge, contributed to an upsurge in entrepreneurship and economic success, which benefited even more people through gainful employment. In 1988, unrest and buying of commodities swept like a tidal wave across China, and the savings of depositors decreased by 30 billion renminbi in 3 months. The critical situation was caused by seismic shifts in the market economy, which in turn was triggered by the collapse of old financial systems. Political turmoil rocked Beijing between May and June of 1989 due to dissatisfaction over certain domestic issues, compounded by international political pressures. In the face of such internal and external pressures, Deng Xiaoping said the basic root of the reform and opening up will last for a century and cannot be changed. He also dismissed opposition to new things and new ideas and maintained that development was the absolute principle. In 1992, 88-year-old Deng Xiaoping made his famous southern tour and delivered several landmark speeches. China faces a dead end if it gives up socialism, refuses reform and opening up, economic development, and improving people's lives gradually, he said. His words continue to exert their influence to this day. The way of reform and opening up was practically institutionalized for China. From 1989, President Jiang Zemin led China's reform and opening up efforts. In the ensuing 13 years, the world witnessed dramatic changes in China brought about the success of its socialist market economy. China's flag was hoisted in Hong Kong in 1997, indicating that the land ceded forcefully over 150 years earlier had been returned to its rightful owner. 2 years later, Macau also rejoined the motherland. In 2001, China became a member of the World Trade Organization, affording it a major stepping stone to a higher level of economic growth. That same year, President Jiang Zemin initiated the 3 represents theory, namely that the party must always represent the development of China's advanced productive forces, that's the economy, the development of China's advanced culture, and the fundamental interests of the masses, that's politics. In 2003, President Hu Jintao declared a manifesto of putting the people's interests first, pursuing a sustainable outlook on development, and promoting an all-round development of the individual, that is social development. The government committed itself to building a harmonious socialist society, attaching importance to democracy, the rule of law, and harmonious coexistence between human and nature. These social core values were to complement economic, political, and cultural developments. In 2012, the newly elected party chief Xi Jinping introduced the China Dream. He said, "Realizing the great renewal of China is the greatest dream for the Chinese people in modern history." President Xi initiated a campaign to curb extravagance with an all-out effort to tackle corruption. He introduced the dimension of ecological civilization by emphasizing the building of a beautiful China, thus completing the 5 pillars of China's future overall development: political, economic, social, cultural, and ecological considerations. With these new developments in mind, the China Energy Fund Committee organizes a series of forums called A China Story at the UN to introduce the latest thinking and developments in China to the international community each year in spring after the National People's Congress. In 2013, A China Story 1 focused on sustainable development and governance. The seminar told the story of sustainable growth in China, which involves a delicate balancing act that takes into account multiple competing forces and needs. In 2014, the Chinese State Council further announced the new pathways to urbanization as an overarching theme of future development, embracing all of the 5 pillars of sustainability. A China Story 2 in 2014 told the story of how a China dream could be realized through this new pathway to urbanization. Under President Xi's blueprint for China's future, or the 4 comprehensives, fulfilling the task of building a moderately prosperous society is a crucial step toward the realization of the China dream. Beginning in 2013, President Xi has put forward his strategic vision of building regional connectivity through the Silk Road Economic Belt and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road. The huge opportunities created by the Belt and Road Initiative for sustainable development and regional cooperation, the CEFC decided to host the last round of A China Story entitled From Diversity, Tolerance to a Community of Common Destiny, the One Belt and One Road Initiative and a New Model of International Cooperation, to tell the China story of how countries along the Belt and Road can forge stronger diplomatic, strategic, and economic ties in building a community of common destiny. The initiative has organically linked the China Dream to the World Dream, promoting peace and development with far-reaching strategic significance and global impact. This year, A China Story 4 is themed on the country's much-anticipated 13th Five-Year Plan for National Economic and Social Development, the roadmap for the nation's economic and social development from 2016 to 2020. This will be a crucial period of transition for China as it steers from a manufacturing, investment, and supply-led economy toward consumer, service, and demand-driven growth. Guiding the implementation of the current 5-year plan is a philosophy that calls for innovation-driven, balanced, green, open, and inclusive development, the 5 development concepts. In terms of targets, over the next 5 years, China aims to maintain a medium to high rate of economic growth, improve living standards and quality of life, raise its level of civilization and improve the social quality of its citizens, significantly improve the quality of its eco-environment, and improve mechanisms and systems for different fields and enable the basic systems of city governance to take shape. More importantly, during this period, the country will seek to achieve, in President Xi's words, the goals of completing the building of a moderately prosperous society in all respects by 2021, and building China into a modern socialist country that is prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, and harmonious by the centenary of the People's Republic of China in 2049, so as to realize the Chinese dream of the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Chinese people love peace and pursue harmony. Such inclinations not only serve its own interests, but that of others they come into contact with. This is the desire of the people, and bespeaks the path of development that China pursues and follows.